The email arrived at 2:17 a.m., a ghost in the machine. It slipped past my spam filters and nestled itself between a final notice bill and an offer for a questionable miracle supplement. For a disgraced journalist like me, my inbox was a graveyard of broken contacts and dead leads. This one felt different. The sender was a string of random characters, but I knew the encryption protocol. It was Julian's. Julian Croft, the best source I ever had, and the man whose disappearance had torpedoed my career. I ran the decryption key, my fingers trembling slightly. It had been 6 months since anyone had heard from him. 6 months of silence that had cost me my job, my credibility, and any semblance of peace. The message that materialized on my screen wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't an explanation. It was just 2 phrases, stark and terrifying against the sterile white background. Meadowview Sanatorium. They don't cure you, they replace you. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a lead, it was a tombstone. Julian was a digital ghost, and this was his final desperate whisper from the other side. The authorities had given up, writing him off as another burnt-out conspiracy theorist who'd simply walked away from his life. I knew better. Julian didn't walk away. He dug, and he must have dug too deep. Within an hour, I was building a new identity. Leo Maxwell was dead for now. In his place was Arthur Finch, a mild-mannered architect grieving the sudden loss of his wife in a tragic car accident. A man haunted by a singular traumatic event. A man broken enough to seek solace in a place like Meadowview. It was a 5-star exclusive wellness retreat tucked away in the remote highlands, promising peace through a revolutionary new treatment. A place for the rich to bury their pain. Or, as Julian's message suggested, to bury people. I had to get inside. I had to find out what happened to him, even if it meant laying my own sanity on the altar.
The drive to Meadowview was a journey into deliberate isolation. The city fell away, replaced by rolling hills that soon gave way to a dense, suffocating forest. My GPS signal died 20 minutes before I reached the gates, a calculated feature, I was sure. The gates themselves were wrought iron and imposing, gliding open without a sound to admit my rented car. They closed behind me with a soft, final thud. The road beyond was perfectly paved, winding through manicured grounds that felt more like a tech billionaire's campus than a place of healing. The main building was a marvel of modern architecture, all glass and warm wood, designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding nature. Yet it felt sterile. There was no bird song, no wind rustling the leaves, just a profound, unnatural silence. A man was waiting for me at the entrance. He was tall, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored gray suit, with silver hair and a smile that was warm and unnervingly precise. "Mr. Finch, I presume. Welcome to Meadowview. I am Dr. Eris Thorne." His handshake was firm, his eyes analytical but kind. He exuded an aura of absolute control and tranquility. "We're so glad you chose to begin your journey to peace with us." He led me through a lobby that resembled a luxury hotel. Through a vast pane of glass, I could see a common area where several other guests, patients, were reading or quietly talking. They all wore the same serene, vacant smiles. There were no loud laughs, no animated gestures, just a shared, placid emptiness that felt profoundly wrong. Dr. Thorne noticed my gaze. "Here, we encourage our guests to shed the burdens of their past. You'll find the quiet transformative," he said smoothly. He showed me to my room. It was minimalist, comfortable, and the window looked out onto a pristine, empty courtyard. The door closed behind me with a soft, magnetic click, and the silence I'd noticed outside rushed in, heavy and absolute. I was in.
My first consultation was the next morning in Dr. Thorne's office. It was a space designed to project benevolent authority, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, plush leather chairs, and a single vast window that framed the oppressive perfection of the grounds. Thorne sat opposite me, his hands steepled. "Tell me about your wife, Arthur," he began, his voice a soft, hypnotic baritone. I fed him the story I had rehearsed until it felt like a second skin. I spoke of Sarah, of the headlights on a rain-slicked road, of the crushing guilt of being the one who survived. I made my voice crack. I let a single, calculated tear trace a path down my cheek. Thorne listened, his expression one of deep, unwavering empathy. It was a masterful performance, on both our parts. "The pain you carry is a heavy burden," he said when I finished. "Our Lethe process can lighten that load. Think of it not as erasure, but as recalibration. We use a combination of targeted electromagnetic pulses and advanced neuro-linguistic programming to help your brain refile the traumatic event. It doesn't remove the memory, but it gently uncouples the debilitating emotional response. The event becomes a simple fact, like any other, stripped of its power to harm you." He made it sound like a system update for the soul. I gave him the only answer Arthur Finch could give. I agreed. The procedure room was next door. No intimidating machines, just a sleek white reclining chair that looked like it belonged on a starship. An attendant with the same placid smile as the guests fitted a lightweight headset over my ears. Soft light pulsed from the ceiling. I heard Thorne's voice, distant and soothing. And then, nothing. A gentle, dreamless void. I came to with a soft chime. I was still in the chair. I felt calm, impossibly calm. The attendant helped me up. "How do you feel, Mr. Finch?" she asked. "Quiet," I managed to say. The grief, the fake, rehearsed grief, was gone. But as I walked back to my room, a cold knot of terror formed in my stomach, a feeling the treatment couldn't seem to touch. I tried to picture my wife's face. I tried to say her name, just inside my head. Sarah. Was it Sarah? For a terrifying half-second, I couldn't remember the name I had invented myself. Back in my room, I fought against the chemical serenity. It felt like trying to swim through honey. The calm wasn't mine. It was an invader, a thick, sweet poison that muffled my thoughts. I dug my fingernails into my palm, focusing on the sharp sting of pain. Julian, Meadowview, they replace you. I repeated the words in my head, a mantra against the encroaching emptiness. The memory of my fake wife's name, Sarah, yes, it was definitely Sarah, had returned. But the momentary lapse had been a terrifying warning shot. I waited until the digital clock on my bedside table glowed 3 a.m. The silence in the hallways was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. I slipped out, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm that felt wonderfully, authentically my own. Every corridor was identical, a maze of soft lighting and muted gray carpets. A small green LED on a ceiling-mounted camera blinked rhythmically, a silent, unblinking eye. Julian's file, which I'd hacked from the public server before arriving, had listed his room as 217. I found it at the end of a long hall. The door was unlocked. Inside the room was a mirror of my own, impersonal, sterile, and utterly devoid of personality. The bed was made with military precision. The desk was empty. I checked everywhere, under the mattress, behind the fixtures, searching for a note, a scratch, anything. Nothing. It was as if he had evaporated. They hadn't just cleaned the room, they had erased it. Disheartened, I slipped back into the hallway and nearly collided with her. It was the woman I'd seen earlier, the one who didn't quite fit. Her name was Ilara, according to the welcome pamphlet. Her hair was slightly unkempt, and her eyes, unlike the placid pools of the others, were wide and darting, filled with a frantic, hunted intelligence. She flinched, then grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. She whispered, "They watch the cameras. Don't let the quiet fool you." She looked over her shoulder, then her eyes locked onto mine, full of desperate urgency. "Don't forget why you came." Before I could respond, she let go and scurried away like a startled animal.
My second session was scheduled for the following afternoon. "I understand you had a restless night, Arthur," Dr. Thorne said, his tone gentle but his eyes missing nothing. "This is normal. The mind sometimes thrashes before it accepts peace." His words were a silken cage, redefining my fear as a symptom he could cure. This time, as the headset was lowered, I tried to fight. I built a fortress in my mind, brick by brick, with memories of Julian, of my real life, of the grit and noise of the city. I clung to my anger and suspicion like a lifeline. But the Lethe process wasn't a battering ram. It was a tide. It seeped through the cracks, warm and inexorable, until my fortress dissolved into sand. The void that followed was deeper, longer. When I woke, the world was soft-focused, dipped in sepia. The attendant guided me back to my room, and I thanked her with a serene smile that felt utterly alien on my face. Alone, I stumbled to the desk, my movements clumsy. The panic was a distant echo, a storm on a far horizon. I knew I was supposed to be scared, but I couldn't quite grasp why. I ran a hand through my hair and saw the small leather-bound notebook I'd hidden under the desk blotter. My journal. My fingers fumbled with the pages. The handwriting was mine, but the words felt aspirational. "My name is Leo Maxwell. I am a journalist. I am here to find out what happened to Julian Croft." It felt like reading the diary of a stranger, a more determined and focused man than the placid shell I currently inhabited. A cold wave washed over me, momentarily clearing the fog. I tried to remember the name of my first editor, the man who gave me my first break, who taught me everything about chasing a story. A bulldog of a man named... What was his name? A face swam in my mind, jowly with a fierce mustache,
but the name was gone. A blank space, a file deleted from my own head. My breath hitched. Trembling, I grabbed the pen. My hand felt disconnected from my brain, but I forced it to move. Documenting the new, terrifying symptom, the Lethe process wasn't just uncoupling emotion. It was snipping the threads of my identity one by one. I wasn't just in a race to find a killer. I was in a race to do it before I forgot who was looking.
My journal, my anchor to a self that was dissolving like salt in water, became my new Bible. The fear it documented was the purest thing I had left. It propelled me out of my room during the social hour in the main lounge, my eyes scanning for Ilara. I found her by the grand piano, tracing the keys with one finger, but making no sound. I sat nearby, pretending to read a magazine. "I'm losing time," I murmured, my voice low, not looking at her. The name of my first boss, it's gone. I saw her hand freeze on the keys. For a long moment, she said nothing. The air crackled with the risk of our conversation. "The staff move like ghosts," she finally whispered, her eyes fixed on the sheet music. "There are paths behind the walls. West wing, 3rd floor, the linen closet at the end of the hall. There's a maintenance panel behind the shelves. It's not for maintenance." She stood up abruptly and walked away, leaving me with the cryptic breadcrumb. That night, my dread was a cold, sharp stone in my gut. I followed her directions, moving through the sleeping facility with a stealth I didn't know I possessed. The linen closet smelled of bleach and lavender. Behind a stack of perfectly folded towels, I found the panel. It opened with a faint groan onto a dusty, narrow corridor. The air was stale, and a single bare bulb cast long, dancing shadows. This was the sanatorium's nervous system, a world away from the serene face it presented. The corridor led to a small, dark room. My breath caught in my throat. One wall was a sheet of one-way glass, looking directly into one of the therapy suites, a room identical to the one I had been in. But the scene inside was a nightmare. A man was strapped into the recliner, his body rigid. This was no gentle recalibration. A complex metal device, all wires and articulated arms, was attached to his head. On a monitor next to the chair, I could see graphs and brainwave patterns fluctuating wildly. Two technicians in scrubs spoke in low, dispassionate tones. "Subject is resisting the personality matrix. Increase the sedative drip and prepare for a cognitive wipe." It wasn't healing. It was an execution of a soul, and I was watching from the wings. My stomach heaved. The image of the struggling patient and the cold, clinical voices of the technicians were burned into my retinas. Cognitive wipe. Personality matrix. This was the raw, unfiltered truth behind Dr. Thorne's silken promises. My induced calm was gone, replaced by a pure, sharp adrenaline that sang in my veins. I couldn't go back to my room. Not now. Further down the dusty corridor, a single steel door was marked Records. It was locked. Of course it was. My past life as a journalist had taught me a few things besides how to structure a sentence. One was that most low-level security is for show. Using the metal clip from my fake ID badge, I went to work on the simple tumbler lock. My hands shook, but after a few tense, scraping moments, I heard a click. The room was small, chilled, and filled with gray filing cabinets. This was the facility's real brain. I pulled open a drawer at random. These weren't medical records. They were contracts,
Case files. I saw the name of a prominent CEO I'd once written a story about. His patient file was for his younger brother, who had been a vocal opponent of a recent company merger. The notes read, "Asset successfully repurposed, new personality matrix, compliant, artistic, no memory of business acumen." My blood ran cold. I frantically searched for my own name. I found it, under Finch, Arthur. My fabricated trauma was detailed, along with Thorne's notes. Subject displays deep-seated suspicion beneath the grief persona. Requires careful handling. High potential for resistance. Then I found the one I was looking for. Croft, Julian. My breath hitched. The file detailed his real identity, his investigation. It tracked his treatment, his fierce psychological resistance. The notes became colder, more frustrated. The final page contained a single typed entry dated 6 months ago. Implantation of Gardner persona failed. Subject resisted matrix integration on 3 separate occasions. Client has been informed and has authorized final protocol. Proceeded with final disposal. Disposal. The word hung in the sterile air, a corporate euphemism for murder. Julian hadn't just been erased, he'd been deleted. I was holding his death certificate, and in the cold, humming silence of that room, I realized I was holding my own. Clutching Julian's file, a cold sweat slicked my skin. My only thought was to put it back, to erase my own presence from the forbidden space. I slid the file into its slot, clicked the cabinet shut, and wiped the handle with my sleeve. The journey back through the service corridor was 1,000 times more terrifying than the one coming in. Every creak of the building, every distant hum of machinery sounded like approaching footsteps. I slipped back into the linen closet, and then my room, my entire body trembling with the aftershock of my discovery. Sleep was impossible. The words "final disposal" were a brand on my mind. I wasn't just a journalist uncovering a story anymore. I was a loose end. The next morning, I found Dr. Thorne waiting for me in the gardens. He was tending to a bed of impossibly perfect white roses. He didn't look up as I approached. "Good morning, Arthur," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "You seem illuminated. Some people find that digging for roots can be a destabilizing process. It's easy to get soiled." He snipped a rose from its stem, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet air. He turned to face me, his eyes holding a new, sharper glint. "It's important to stay on the prescribed path to wellness here. The architecture of Meadowview is complex. One could easily get lost in areas not intended for our guests." His smile was a thin, bloodless line. He was telling me he knew. He was showing me the bars of my cage. Then he delivered the killing blow. "We had another guest once, a man very much like you, driven, a journalist, I believe. He became obsessed with uncovering what he called the truth, but he couldn't accept the simple peace we offered him. A tragic case." He paused, letting the threat hang between us. "He resisted his treatment." As I walked away, my heart a block of ice in my chest, I saw it, an orderly standing by the entrance to my wing, watching me. The smiles of the staff I passed were no longer vacant, they were watchful. The green eyes of the cameras seemed to follow me with a new predatory focus. The illusion was shattered. I was no longer a guest. I was an inmate, and my next session had just become my execution date. The mask of Arthur Finch wasn't a disguise anymore. It was a countdown timer.
Panic is a poor strategist, but it's a powerful motivator. I knew Thorne was watching, waiting for me to break. My only chance was Alara. During the afternoon's quiet time in the library, I saw my opening. While the supervising orderly was distracted by another patient, I walked past Alara's table and tripped, sending a cascade of heavy art books crashing to the floor. In the ensuing chaos, as the orderly rushed over, I knelt beside her, pretending to gather the books. "The records room," I hissed, my back to the camera. "I found it. They're not treating people, they're replacing them. Julian Croft, final disposal." Her face, already pale, went ashen. The fear in her eyes was familiar, but now it was sharpened by the horror of confirmation. Later that evening, she found me in a secluded corner of the conservatory, a place with poor sight lines for the cameras. She began to talk, her voice a torrent of hushed, desperate words. "I'm not crazy," she started, twisting a loose thread on her sleeve. "My name is Alara Vance. My father died last year, leaving me a controlling interest in his company. My uncle wanted it. He tried to have me declared incompetent. When that failed, he found Dr. Thorne." Her story tumbled out, a tale of forged psychiatric reports and a kidnapping disguised as a wellness intervention. They had brought her here to overwrite her, to turn the sharp-witted heiress into a docile, compliant simpleton who would happily sign over her fortune. "My paranoia," she said with a bitter laugh, "is me fighting back. Every day they try to pump this quiet emptiness into my head, and every night I fight to remember who I am. I write my name on the bottom of my foot. I recite the details of my father's will. I force myself to feel angry, to feel scared. It's exhausting. It's breaking my mind. But I'm still here." She looked at me, her frantic energy now focused into a razor's edge. "They think I'm just a glitch in their system, but I've been watching, listening. There's a storm coming tomorrow night, a bad one. When it gets bad enough, they have to briefly disable the perimeter fence's electrical grid to prevent a surge. It's a window, a small one, but it's the only one we're going to get." In that moment, we were no longer just two victims. We were a conspiracy.
A window. It was more than I'd had an hour ago, but the journalist in me screamed that it wasn't enough. Escaping was only half the battle. If we ran, Thorne would paint us as two delusional patients having a shared psychotic break. Our story would die in the wind. We needed proof, indisputable, damning proof. We spent the next day communicating in stolen whispers and scribbled notes passed in the spines of library books. I told her about the computer in the records office, the digital heart of this whole monstrous operation. "The files are the key," I wrote on a napkin. "Without them, it's just our word against a billionaire's doctor." Alara, with the grim practicality of someone who had been fighting a quiet war for months, agreed. The objective shifted. It was no longer just an escape. It was a heist. We formulated the plan piece by dangerous piece. My job was to get the evidence. That afternoon, I managed to pry open one of the tablets in the media room, my fingers working clumsily under a table. I extracted the small, solid-state drive, a tiny black rectangle that held the potential for justice. At the height of the storm, I would use the service corridors to get back to the records office, access the terminal, and copy everything.
Elara's job was the diversion. As someone the staff already considered unstable, a sudden outburst from her would be less suspicious. At precisely 2 a.m., when the storm was predicted to be at its fiercest, she would go to the East Wing's kitchen. She would trip a circuit breaker or set off the fire alarm, something loud, disruptive, and guaranteed to pull the limited night crew away from the West Wing, where I would be. "They'll come for me first," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor I could see in her hands. "It will buy you time. Once you have the files, don't wait. Go straight for the north perimeter fence. The ground is uneven there. The cameras have a blind spot." We finalized the details in the late afternoon, a silent pact sealed with a shared look of terror and resolve. We would have one shot. Failure didn't just mean another session in the white chair. We had both read Julian's file. We knew exactly what failure meant. As the sky outside began to darken, bruised with the promise of the coming storm, the sanatorium had never felt more like a tomb. The storm broke just after midnight, a furious assault of wind and water that hammered against the building. The lights flickered once, twice, then held steady on a backup generator. This was it. Hiding the tiny drive in my sock, I felt a surge of terrifying, hopeful energy. It was the same feeling I used to get just before breaking a big story. It was the feeling of being alive. I slipped into the service corridor at 1:45 a.m., my body thrumming with adrenaline. The air in the narrow passage was thick and humid. I made my way to the junction that led to the records office and waited in the pitch darkness, listening to the symphony of the storm outside and the frantic beating of my own heart. My watch hit 2 a.m. I counted the seconds, my ears straining for the sound of the fire alarm from the East Wing. 2:01. Nothing but the howling wind. 2:05. The silence from inside the facility was absolute, a dead weight against the chaos outside. My blood turned to ice. Something was wrong. The distraction wasn't coming. Proceeding without it was suicide. A wave of nausea and defeat washed over me as I aborted the mission, slinking back through the corridors to my room, the drive in my sock now feeling like a lead weight. I had just closed my door when I heard the electronic chime of a keycard. The door glided open. Dr. Thorne stood there, flanked by 2 imposing orderlies. The mask of the benevolent therapist was gone completely, replaced by an expression of cold, clinical disappointment. He wasn't playing games anymore. "I am truly sorry it has come to this, Mr. Maxwell," Thorne said, stepping into the room. His voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. "I had hoped you would embrace the peace we offer, but hope, it seems, can be a stubborn illness." He gestured, and one of the orderlies patted me down with brutal efficiency, pulling the small drive from my sock. Thorne took it, examining it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a curious insect. "And as for your co-conspirator, Miss Vance has been taken for an emergency session to help her finally overcome her resistance." He pocketed the drive.
Your own final treatment has been moved up. We can't risk further contamination. 8 a.m. tomorrow. A new, happier life awaits you." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Don't worry," he said, looking back at me, a flicker of something monstrous in his eyes. "We will make sure you forget all of this." The door clicked shut, the lock engaging with a heavy, final thud. I was alone in the silence, utterly and completely broken.
The hours between Thorne's visit and the gray light of dawn were the longest of my life. I sat on the edge of the bed, a condemned man listening to the storm slowly dying outside. Defeat was a physical presence in the room, a heavy blanket threatening to suffocate me. They had won. They had my evidence, they had Ilara, and in a few short hours they would have my mind. I picked up my journal, my own handwriting, a ghostly epitaph for a man who used to be me. And then something shifted. Reading the entries, the raw data of my investigation, my journalistic instincts began to stir from their stupor. I couldn't outrun them, and I couldn't fight them. But Julian didn't fight with his fists either. He fought with information. What if I could do the same? My mind raced back to the records room, to the cold corporate language of the files. I remembered a specific addendum in the file of a failed case from 2 years ago. A Mr. Miller. The note detailed a catastrophic system malfunction during the procedure, leading to a permanent vegetative state. It was blamed on an undiagnosed neurological anomaly, but the technical notes suggested a software glitch that was hastily patched and covered up. The staff, especially the junior technicians, would have never been told the real reason. They would have been fed the company line. A plan, thin and desperate as a spider's thread, began to form. I couldn't stop the procedure, so I would walk into it. My target wouldn't be Thorne, a true believer and a monster. It would be one of the technicians. I remembered one from the observation room, younger than the other, with a nervous habit of checking his watch. A man who looked like he was just doing a job, not fulfilling a quasi-religious mission. My final gambit wouldn't be physical. It would be a logic bomb, a perfectly crafted piece of information designed to shatter his confidence in the system at the most critical moment. I would use the truth as a weapon. At precisely 8 a.m., the door chimed and opened. 2 orderlies entered, their faces impassive. I didn't resist. I stood up calmly, my face a mask of weary resignation. I allowed them to lead me out, my steps even, my gaze fixed ahead. They saw a man broken. They couldn't see the raging fire behind my eyes, the desperate, racing thoughts of a journalist preparing to deploy his last, most dangerous story. The walk to the therapy suite was a grim parody of a march to the gallows. The room was just as I had seen it from behind the glass, cold, white, and dominated by the terrifyingly complex machine that sat beside the reclining chair. Dr. Thorne was waiting, a conductor ready to begin his symphony. And next to the control console stood the 2 technicians. The older one was stone-faced, but the younger one, the one I mentally christened Ben, kept nervously adjusting his glasses. He was my target. They strapped me into the chair. The leather was cold against my skin. Thorn loomed over me, a sterile smile on his lips. No more messy curiosity, Mr. Maxwell. No more inconvenient truths. Just peace. The machine whirred to life, an articulated arm lowering a halo of wires toward my head. As Ben reached to make a final adjustment on the console, I spoke, my voice cutting through the clinical hum. It was calm, almost casual. "Just be careful with the primary sequence," I said, my eyes locked on his. "I'd hate for there to be a repeat of the Miller incident. That software glitch was nasty, wasn't it?" The effect was instantaneous. The senior technician scoffed, but Ben froze, his hand hovering over the screen. His head whipped around to look at me, his face pale with shock. The Miller incident, a name he had likely never heard, tied to a cover-up he was unknowingly part of. He looked for Thorn for reassurance, but Thorn's face had hardened into a mask of fury. "Begin the procedure now," Thorn commanded. But in that exact moment, a piercing shriek ripped through the facility. The main lights cut out, replaced by the flashing crimson strobes of an emergency alarm. Ilara! A wild, triumphant thought flashed through my mind. She was still fighting. The chaos was my only chance. Thorn was shouting orders. The senior technician was frantically trying to override the alarm's effect on their system. And Ben stood paralyzed, his seed of doubt having bloomed into full-blown panic. In the confusion, a strap on my right arm had not been fully locked. With a surge of pure adrenaline, I tore my arm free. I didn't run. I lunged, not at Thorn, but at the console. My hand closed around the small black external hard drive used for the daily system backups, and I ripped it from its USB port. The alarm wailed. Red lights painted the scene in demonic flashes. I held the drive, a small piece of plastic that held all Thorn's crimes. For a moment, everyone just stared. Then Thorn let out a roar of pure rage, and the chase was on. I bolted from the room, clutching the hard drive like a holy relic. The hallways were a surreal nightmare. Emergency strobes painted everything in frantic strokes of red and black. Orderlies were running, shouting into radios, while some patients, the ones most deeply under the facility's spell, simply stood in the corridors, their faces placidly confused by the chaos. I used them as moving shields, weaving through the chaos, my only thought, the north perimeter fence. I skidded around a corner and saw her, Ilara. 2 orderlies had her cornered near the kitchens, the source of the shrieking alarm. They were trying to subdue her, but she fought like a cornered wildcat. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and, without a word, discharged a massive cloud of CO2 foam at them. In their blinded, sputtering confusion, Ilara broke free and ran to my side. "I was hoping you'd show up," she gasped, a wild, triumphant grin on her face. Together, we raced for the north exit, but he was there, blocking the glass doors that led to the rain-swept grounds. Dr. Thorn. His suit was disheveled, his silver hair a mess. The mask of control was gone, replaced by the wild-eyed fury of a zealot whose temple was crumbling around him. "You think this is a victory?" he snarled, his voice raw. "I offer them paradise, a world without pain, without grief, without the pointless suffering you call the human condition. I'd take their broken pieces and I'd give them peace, a gift. And you want to drag them back into the hell of their own minds, all for the sake of some grubby little truth?" He took a step forward, his hands clenched. This was the true man, stripped of all pretense, a monster convinced of his own righteousness. I held the hard drive up slightly, my knuckles white. "I don't offer peace, Thorn," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "You sell oblivion. There's a difference." As Thorn opened his mouth to reply, Ilara acted. With a cry of rage, she grabbed a decorative bronze statue from its pedestal and hurled it through the plate-glass door, shattering it into a million pieces. The storm roared into the hallway, a blast of wind and rain. That was our exit. We scrambled through the broken frame, not even feeling the cuts from the glass, and ran into the maelstrom of the night. Behind us I could hear Thorn's screams of rage, swallowed by the storm and the blaring of his own broken alarm. We stumbled through the forest for what felt like an eternity, fueled by adrenaline and the primal need for distance. The storm slowly gave way to a cold, dripping dawn. We finally hit a road, a black ribbon of asphalt in the gray light, and flagged down a logging truck. The driver's shocked face was the first truly normal human expression I had seen in days. The hard drive, wrapped in my wet sock, was still safe in my pocket. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The story didn't just break, it detonated. The hard drive was a treasure trove of evil, containing everything from client contracts to videos of the real procedures. Headlines screamed about the mind wipers of Meadowview. Dr. Thorn was arrested, his righteous fury replaced by a cold, silent compliance. Ilara's uncle was indicted. A dozen powerful people were ruined. My career was reborn in the blaze of the story I had risked my life and my mind to tell. Ilara got her life back. She testified, a pillar of strength, and is now in control of her father's company. We talk sometimes. We are the only two members of a club no one would ever want to join, bonded by the shared memory of a place designed to destroy memories. She is healing, but she says the silence is sometimes still too loud. I am writing this now from my apartment, the city of vibrant, chaotic mess outside my window. I got justice for Julian. His picture sits on my desk, and I'd like to think he would be proud. But my victory was not without its cost. The Lethe process, even the small doses I received, left its mark. They are like tiny surgical holes in the fabric of my past. I still don't know the name of my first editor. Sometimes I'll reach for a word, a street name from my childhood, and find only a smooth, empty space where the memory should be. Thorn was wrong about everything, but he was right about one thing. You can't uncouple the pain without damaging the person. I have the full story, the complete, unvarnished truth of Meadowview. But every now and then I'll find a page missing from my own narrative, a paragraph deleted without a trace, and I'll forever wonder what was written there.